If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. Over a decade ago, I boarded a plane and went to explore the grasslands or savannas of Africa. I'd just gotten out of school and had the idea of working with animals and observing their behaviour. I'd spend all night in my tiny apartment reading about encounters, attacks, and stories told by those native to the area. I was quite involved with an online group of people who shared the same interests as me. Some were professors, some were students, biologists even, rangers, and so many more. That's where I met Trick. Well, his name was Patrick, but he hates when people call him that. Our friendship was instant. Soon enough we got in Africa. I know it seems wild and thoughtless, but I was a 23-year-old and adventurous. The world had so much to offer, and I was ready to experience it all. Together, we found a guy who was going to guide us and make sure we stayed within the correct perimeters. He knew the line where safe met dangerous, and observation met attack, a line that we did not want to cross. Our guide's name was Han. He was rugged and intimidating. He smelled like gasoline too. I didn't know why. He wore face-down tanned wrinkles and a constant frown. "You two kids need to understand something," he said. I remembered the gruff, gravelly tone in his voice, like I heard it yesterday. My word will stay. Whatever I say, you do, or you'll get killed. It sounded as though he had some authority complex, but he shrugged and nodded if we appeared to be disagreeing, so we just smiled and nodded. The air was hot, feathering over my face. The land seemed to stretch on forever. Trees were sparse, but tall. Wispy grass concealed the ground effortlessly. I remembered feeling so small and vulnerable. The sun drowned me in an intense heat. The sweat effortlessly bounced off my face. While we set out our stuff down in a well-built and sturdy tent, Hank continued his speech. "We can go out in a few hours if you all want to try and see some lions. They prefer hunting at night." Sounds good to me. I looked over to Trick, who seemed confident and excited. Yeah, me too. Trick didn't shut up the entire time when we got our stuff ready to head out. His voice wavered in eagerness, and he was practically bouncing off the walls of the tent. "Mikey, do you think we'll see anything? Mikey, do you think they'll see us as prey? Mikey, do you think you can stomach watching an animal get murdered in front of you?" The questions did not stop until Hun hastily pulled open the door. "Hey," he threw a tightly wadded bag at us. "Here are some supplies. You're gonna need them." We looked at each other. Cotton-scented candles? I looked up to meet Hun's eyes. "You'll see why. Don't question me or anything." "Lions must not like the smell of cotton," Trick joked. He then lets out a humorless laugh and says, "It's not just the lions I'm saving you from." Now I'm not gonna lie and say Hans' words didn't leave me uneasy. I rationalized by telling myself he meant other predators like hyenas or something. Though, I'd admit, I never heard of using a Pacific scented candle before. The tires on the Jeep cursed over the sand easily, and the breeze dulled the sting of the setting sun. Orange painted the blue sky, leaving a blanket of shade and warmth. After a while, the sky darkens. I saw more stars than I ever have before. God, it is beautiful. Pretty, isn't it? He yelled over the engine. Yeah, I yelled back. He continues driving, and I noticed Trick's comfortable posture on the other side of the Jeep. His arms hung out the window, his hand waving against the wind. We now pulled over, not far behind a huge tree, single tree, with binoculars, a defense weapon, a heavy jacket, our damn candles. We sat up beneath the protection of the truck. Hans sat behind us, making sure to light every single candle that we're encircled with. Why'd you choose this area? Hans said aloud. I'm not going to say the exact area we went, for later on you'll understand this. I began, but Trick's voice now overpowered mine. Lots of animals attack here. Are the lions more aggressive? They seem to kill a lot of villagers out here, more than other areas. That's not why we came, I added in defense, but they both ignored me and let out another laugh, and the same sent chills down my entire body. In reality, this excursion was cheaper than any others we looked into, by a mile. Ain't no lion ever attacked no one out here. Both Trick and I began to speak up, but Han held up an index finger. He wanted to silence us. Hey, there's another predator out there. Even the lions don't mess with. I told you when we first spoke on the phone. This place is dangerous. But you needed to listen to me, to know that everything's fine, okay? I vaguely remember the first conversation Trick and I had with Han. He made us agree to be completely compliant and understand the various risks of the dangerous encounters before he agreed upon. I didn't press him further, but instead, muttering a weak, okay, before gluing my eyes to the binoculars. A long time passed with nothing, not even a word spoken in the cool air. The wind rustled the grass around us, flickering the flame ever so slightly. Then, as though somebody hit the mute button on a television, everything goes dead silent. Not the kind you'd think. I'm talking about deafeningly quiet. No bugs. No sound of the wilderness around us. It's as though we're in a vacuum, and the air felt still, and similar to the way static builds up before a storm. A terrible storm. My whole body goes stiff, like cardboard. Every hair stands on end. Part of me wanted to run off. The other part, desperately trying to listen to the sound of my heart beating. Hands visibly tensed. His eyes are very serious, and he looks at both of us. Softly but sternly, he whispered, "Don't leave the circle." He gestured to the candles around us. "Please." "What's out there?" Trick asks, panic obviously in his face. His hands are now shaking uncontrollably. Hans stayed silent, taking in a shallow breath. The flames from the candle lit up to the small space around us, and brought attention to every detail in our worried faces for the flames. Wouldn't they attract attention to us? Han, I began. Won't the fight? No. Why? Shh. Listen. Han's face was now extremely focused, but something in his eyes almost appeared excited even. I could not place a finger upon it. It looked like we all stopped breathing at once, and in the distance, we hear the stampede of feet, but without the similar sound of hoofs. It's a deep thud, rhythmic. I tried to swallow, but my mouth is dry. With binoculars, I scanned the area to see what was approaching, but I see nothing. I watched the grass, the way the blades melted into the black sky. I watched the horizon, then left, to the right, panning over slowly until I saw them. They were black, blacker than the night sky, fast, skinny and on all fours. The skin covering their visible bones looks wet, glossy. My stomach felt quite uneasy now, and the urge to sprint back to the jeep was so intense that I struggled to keep myself grounded. My eyes were glued though. I could not walk away. With every inhuman movement, quick and jumpy, my heart raced a little bit faster. I knew my body was telling me to run, alerting me, trying to get me away from danger. But my mind told me stay planted, don't move. Now there's 3 of them, running in jerky motions, but in a pack. Not looking like any animal I've ever studied before. I could see the way their muscles moved, below the slim layer of skin that they had. Their bones seemed stretched with every extension of their legs, as though they're rubber. Then, they suddenly stop. All at once, halting, and one stood, on 2 legs. Its hips are curled over. I can see its teeth, they're long and sharp. It stretched its neck, facing upwards towards the sky, smelling the air. Shuffling started. I immediately looked over to Trick and Han. There was a horrified expression on Han's face. Not of horror, not just betrayal, not sadness, but pure dread. All I felt over me was the desperation to escape. My heart dropped. The world is in slow motion now. No nightmare, where time is morphed beyond comprehension. Trick was running towards the jeep. I know he had seen them. His response had kicked in and he bolts. The sound of his boots were excruciatingly loud. But that's nothing compared to the high-pitched scream that come from that thing. My eyes locked with Hans. The world sped up, and I could hear them closing in on Trick. Not that they're very far away in the first place. I felt so numb. The tickle from the tears in my eyes reminded me, this is real. And I tried to focus on Han's face as he mouths to me in complete silence. Quiet. I put my hands over my mouth. Tears are now blurring my vision. The stars. He looked terrified. He looked desperate for me and wanted me to be as still as possible Look at the stars. Focus on them. I did as he said, and started to look above. I counted them as Trixie's splitting scream tore across the Havana. I tried so hard and desperately to keep my eyes fixated on the shapes in the sky. The sound of his screams turned into cries. The snapping of bones echoed and popped. The ripping of muscles and the blood-curdling chokes for air settled in every particle of my body. It's a sound I will never forget. There's a dog in the stars. My eyes traced the shape of its tail. I stared at it again until my head began to throb. It felt like hours had passed before the sound stopped, before the screams died down, and the sound of chomping and chewing dissipated. The heavy smell of cotton overpowers the stench of blood, that coppery smell. I don't even remember walking back to the Jeep. I definitely don't remember the sun coming up, nor do I remember when the sound of the grass swaying came back to life, nor do I remember the ride back to our tent. I do, however, remember the very faint splash of blood that covered a tiny part of the ground, all that's left of him. I remembered hearing Hun reporting another lion attack to the locals. I remember the numbness that covers my body. I heard Trick's voice in my mind playing like a tape that can never stop. I never asked Han why he ruled us there knowing what could have happened, or why he didn't warn us. Part of me blames myself. Part of me blames him. I never asked him why the scent of cotton. Specifically, why was that covering our scent? My only guess is trial and error. I really try my best not to think of it, but every night I relive the terror in my head. I try and move on, but how can you? It still sends chills up my spine when people ask me, why don't I like looking up at the stars?
He looked exactly like he did then, but a bit taller. The soft face with small eyes and thin lips that always made him look younger than he actually was. Just a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow that made him look more grown up. Grinning, he dropped his duffel bag and opened his arms wide. "Richie, how are you, man?" Darren, his gritty voice so familiar, asked. I must have looked stoned, because I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I squeaked out a hello, and I was quickly pulled into a hug. It's weird to think, but he even smelled the same as he did back then. Weed and pepperoni pizza. Darren being Darren, he rammed along about how long it's been, and how much I've changed, and I couldn't help but think, you died 4 years ago. Myself, Darren, and 2 friends would always go into nearby forests for camping trips, between the ages of about 12 and 15. They were just chances to get away from our parents, smoke weed, and eat a bunch of rubbish without our adults telling us off. None of us had much money, so our camping equipment was 2 kiddie tents, stolen from siblings or neighbour yards, and a box of matches that we'd use to make our own fire pit. We weren't totally stupid. We knew not to stray from paths, and we never went much more than a mile into the forest. There was a 1 mile marker, and before that, whichever way you wandered, you would come out into a main road. Past that marker, it was thick, unforgiving woodlands that was almost impossible to find your way out of. Further than that was a disgusting swampland that stunk like rotten farts. Guess what we'd do? We'd be cocky and dare each other to walk into the woodlands. 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 30. The triumphant would come out swaggering that wasn't scary. Only idiots could get lost. You can probably guess. We are idiots. Due to a peculiar week of warm weather in mid-November, we decided it would be fun to go camping. Covered in winter coats and snow boots and thick thermo socks, we got into the 1 mile marker, and before setting up, one friend, Jimmy, said, "Let's go deeper. I heard rangers were going round and rounding people up. I'm not going home because of some forest security guard." Agreeing, we went past that 1 mile marker. I can't be sure, but I'd say we were 3 miles deep past the marker. The woodlands were incredibly crowded. We had to climb over a lot of huge ground-broken roots to finally find a flat clearing for our tents. It wasn't too scary, just darker than the other area. We set up, lit some blunts, and chowed down on a bunch of chips and 2 days old pizza. Nothing happened until late in the night. The tents were small, but we could fit 2 people in each. Jimmy and Marcus went in one, Darren and I in the other. We soon fell asleep, probably around 11 PM. My phone buzzed at about 1 AM, which woke me up as it was under my face, with a message from my dad, drunk texting to see if I'm alright. Delirious from sleep, I touch it and turn the harsh light screen on. Just before the light went off, I noticed a silhouette on the tent. I went off to see who it was properly, and with my brain still in night mode, I touched the phone to get light again. The silhouette didn't shift, but I saw it properly then. It crouched down. I guess it noticed the light coming through the tent, and I saw how long its legs were. Like 5-foot long sticks. Its arms were similar, swinging as it crouched. It pressed its long finger into the tent and made that horrid scraping noise. I kept as quiet as I could. If it was a ranger, they would have started banging on the tent and announcing themselves. I turned the light off again and turned to face Darren. Outside the tent came the sounds of leaves and sticks crush underfoot. The person was sneaking around, and the sound was so careful and quiet. They didn't want to be heard. I began to get those shakes you get when you're really cold and anxious. I tried to whisper to Darren to wake up. Pretty sure he had a pocket knife in his body somewhere. I thought it would come in handy with this freak checking out our tents. I whispered through my teeth, "Darren, wake up!" But the guy was a super heavy sleeper. I almost pissed myself when I heard the zipper of the tent begin to pull. The person was trying to open it, carefully though. They were trying hard to stay quiet. They were gently tugging the zip, but they wouldn't figure out which way it went. It went from top to bottom. Finally the zip comes down, and I kept my eyes closed tight, but I was shaking like a leaf. I opened my eyes a slit to see what was there. A hand, black and thin, crept in. Extremely slowly, this hand did not twitch, but hovered further into the tent, over the feet of Darren's sleeping bag. Before I could nudge Darren to wake him up, this hand clenched hold of Darren's ankle and pulled him out the tent. Darren instantly began screaming, and so did I. I tried to grab hold of Darren before he disappeared through the tent's opening. He was pulled out so fast. The tent rolled over, but I finally managed to get out to see Darren getting dragged into the woodlands beside the clearing. He was covering his face from the twigs and shrubs he was pulled into, screaming and crying to help him. Jimmy and Marcus's faces appeared from the tent with worried looks. I yelled at them that something had taken Darren, and they looked at one another with hesitant faces. They thought it was a joke. I grabbed my boots, forgetting my coat, and ran in the direction that Darren was dragged. Jumping over a small tree trunk, losing my balance. I got hit in the face with a branch. I panicked as a liquid sprayed on me from the leaves of the branch. It stunk of copper, but I just rubbed my face and continued in a straight line. I could hear Jimmy and Marcus following me, asking me to stop, and it wasn't funny. I sprinted as fast as I could, taking a beating from the branches and roots that got thicker and thicker as I went in. I was shouting Darren's name, and soon Jimmy and Marcus did the same, but we got no reply. 5 minutes of running through thick nature brought me to another clearing, bigger than our tents were, with a large tree in the centre. There was a little bit of moonlight to see the clearing, but nothing else was clear. Jimmy luckily grabbed his flashlight before he began following me. When he put the light on me, he and Marcus jumped, as the light showed the splashed blood all over me. My face, clothes, and everything was covered in splatters. That's what was on the branches. I began to cry as I rubbed the blood off me. Jimmy took the light off me, and with a worried look, followed something on the ground. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Jimmy pointed to the ground. A trail of blood ran through the woodlands, through the clearing, and up a large tree in the centre. We all followed the light as Jimmy moved along the trail. It covered most of the bark and curled around the trunk. We peeked around the tree and the blood stopped on the trunk. Marcus looked further around the trunk when a droplet of blood fell on his forehead, then another, and then another. He looked up and began screaming. Darren's body. His eyes still open but blank. He was slung over a thick branch. I told Jimmy to keep his light on, and I tried to get him down. I pulled his arm and his body came down like a sack of bricks. I think we all knew he was gone there and then, but we just didn't want it to be true. Darren landed on his belly, and we saw that his back had been ripped to shreds. We all cried. There wasn't much we could do. After a long time sitting next to his body, the sun was beginning to rise. We didn't say much, but we agreed we'd have to get back to our tents and call someone. Our parents, the Rangers, Darren's parents. I pet Darren's hair before I stood up. He was my best friend, and I had to leave him there. If I just shook him awake when the thing was outside the tent, he'd probably be alive. As we began to leave the clearing, the sound of squelching came from behind. We span around and saw that thing, holding Darren's body. It was tall, maybe 7 foot and thin, and all black. Its eyes were wide and sunken. I can't remember much else, as it quickly ran into the woodlands with Darren's body. Jimmy and Marcus had to restrain me from running after it. They basically dragged me, kicking and screaming, back to the tents. When we got there, 2 rangers were checking the tents out, and their faces switched from annoyed to shocked when they saw us, covered in blood and crying. Darren's body was never found. His parents were distraught. He had a younger brother, and that kid was never the same. Went from fun and bouncy to just there. He drifted day to day. 2 years after his death, Darren's family moved down south, and we never heard from them again. The rangers and police believe we didn't do anything, but they didn't believe our monster story. Most likely a wolf. Shock can make you think crazy things. It's not their fault, one officer said behind our backs. Jimmy, Marcus and I stayed friends, but basically ended contact when we finished high school. We never spoke about Darren again. But now, in the flesh, Darren was chatting away to me in the doorway of my dorm. I asked him into my room. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I thought we could get some privacy to talk. The way he spoke and acted, he was so comfortable around me, like the last time I saw him was yesterday. He sat down on the bed opposite mine and continued talking. I don't know what he was talking about, but I stopped him and took some time to come up with what I wanted to ask him. Darren, how are you here? I asked. What do you mean? He laughed. I did good in high school, dumbass, just like you. I shook my head. No, Darren. Do you remember 4 years ago? Darren was smiling, but his eyes went blank. Yeah, we were in freshman year. Do you remember our camping trips? I said. His smile faded as he looked around the room, as if trying to find an answer. Yeah, smoke weed and eat junk. Darren, I trailed off. What was I supposed to say? Oh, dude, you died. You don't remember? Man, what fun times. On one of those trips you were attacked, and your body was never found. Darren gave me a totally blank look and grinned. The grin was a genuinely happy smile. In a flash, the grin dropped and he looked sullen. I moved away that summer. Never went on camping trips. He wouldn't look at me now. We sat in silence for some time before he stood up grabbing his bag. He was breathing really quickly, his chest going up and down fast. Dude, are you alright? I have to go, Darren muttered, looking at his feet. I stood, but he quickly shuffled to the door and left. The door swung shut behind him, and by the time I opened it, I looked up and down the dorm halls. He was nowhere to be seen. People were still moving in the dorms. Hey, did any of you see that guy that just left? I asked a small crowd. A few stopped and shook their heads at me. I feel like I've gone crazy. I have no explanation for what just happened. I'll never forget the time that my friend and I decided to take an impulsive camping trip during the winter of 2006. Had my parents not been out of town that weekend, they would have never let me go, especially not with the friend I was going with. They had never liked Travis. Out of all the friends I ever had, Travis was the one they hated the most. They would always say that he was a bad influence, and they weren't entirely wrong. Thankfully, I was a smart kid, and saw through Travis's bull. As for his parents, they never really cared for what he did or where he went. That blew my mind. How awesome it would have been if my parents didn't care what I did. After the camping trip, I'm kind of glad they did though. Travis insisted that I be the one who brings the food, and he brought the gear. His basement was full of all kinds of stuff that his parents hoarded over the years, and so finding camping gear wasn't much of an issue. We bundled up and hiked through the woods right behind our school. This would have been around 9 at night. We walked for about half an hour until we found a neat little clearing of trees to set up. We pitched the tent, and after about 20 minutes of trying, we finally managed to get the small fire going. Keep in mind that this was in the middle of December in northern Canada, so the entire landscape was smothered in a blanket of undisturbed snow. We stayed up a while, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows. We talked about people we went to school with and local rumours. One of Travis's things was to tell stories. He loved it. Most of the time these stories were far-fetched and hard to believe, but the one he told me was about something I thought about a lot. Recently, a kid in our school had vanished on his way home from school. There were a few people who said that they saw him wandering next to the woods behind the school, which were conveniently the same woods we were camping in. I had forgotten about it until Travis had to remind me. It made me uneasy, being in the same place where a kid disappeared. He told me that the police think Elkman got him. Something that had the body of a man and an elk for a head. I immediately dismissed his ridiculous story, and we both laughed a little bit. As the night continued, we told jokes, gossiped, and laughed with the thought of that missing kid lingering in our minds. Eventually, we both decided we were too tired, and we should probably get to sleep. I bundled up, climbed into the tent with Travis, and then we both drifted off to sleep. I awoke maybe an hour later to find Travis sitting up in the tent with his flashlight on, a look of terror on his face. It was the first time I've ever seen Travis genuinely scared. I asked him what was wrong. He told me he heard what sounded like a kid laughing next to the tent. I rolled my eyes and told him where to go, but then I heard it too. It was a giggle, maybe about 20 feet from our tent. I sat up in fear. Travis and I looked at each other and listened. We started to hear bushes rustling next to us, and that was it. We piled out of the tent and bolted through the woods towards home as fast as we could, leaving the camp behind. As we ran, I thought I heard a pair of footsteps running behind us, but I didn't dare look back. We eventually made it out of the woods within 20 minutes, but kept going on until we reached Travis's house. Terrified, we spent the rest of the night cowering in his bedroom with the light on. The next morning, we told Travis's parents what happened, and his dad came with us to the campsite. What we found in the camp was enough to make me want to cry. In the snow around the entire site were pairs of bare human footprints, resembling that of a child's. Travis's father tried to rationalise it, but we all know that no one lived out there, not for quite a distance. We also found snow in the tent, and our bags all emptied out onto the floor, which meant whoever chased us out the woods that night had gone back and rummaged through our stuff. There was nothing missing luckily, but it was still creepy. We packed up the camp and left as quickly as we could. I'm now graduated and living my life as an adult. Travis and I are still good friends, and he's doing well. While we're still friends, we don't talk about that night. The very thought that someone was lingering out in the middle of nowhere, listening and watching, it haunts me to this day. The missing kid was never found.